Rocket Mortgage.
Live from the O'Reilly Auto Parts Studios, here's Jake Asman.
Baseball offseason is in full swing, and the New York Yankees are expected to be aggressive. They are expected to be the Yankees and spend some money and try and fix a team that vastly underperformed in 2021. For more on what the Yankees might do, we go out to our progressive guest line right now. We bring on Max Goodman, who covers the New York Yankees for Sports Illustrated, and he's kind enough with his time here on a Saturday. Max, Jake Asman here. Appreciate it as always. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Jake. Hope you're doing well.
Fantastic, man. So looking at this Yankees team, Max, obviously you were at basically every game this year. You saw them up close. What are the biggest needs for this team as the offseason is finally here?
I think it's pretty simple, Jake. They got to address the offense, and it starts with shortstop, which I think that we all know the Yankees are going to try to sign a top-tier, big-name free agent, perhaps in the next couple of weeks, depending on how the market progresses. But I think we could also see some changes, maybe at first base, maybe in center field, maybe even at catcher. I think there are a lot of positions that this team can address because of the inconsistencies that really plagued this offense this past season.
You look at these shortstops that are out there, Max. I mean, which one is the most likely to be signed by Brian Cashman?
You know, I go back and forth with this pretty much every day with, you know, the rumors that are coming out and the way that I think about the situation. I think that it comes down to, I don't really consider Javi Baez as an option for them. I think it's the top four, meaning Correa, Seager, Simeon, and Story. And perhaps in that order in terms of who's the best on the market right now. And I think I could even reflect this back to you because you've been a Yankees fan forever. I just can't see them signing Carlos Correa with all that's happened with the Houston Astros, the sign stealing scandal. Everybody knows about it. But having him come into the locker room and be a leader right away, I don't think that's going to sit well with guys like Aaron Judge. I mean, my first spring training on the beat was 2020, right after all the sign stealing stuff came out. And there's some disdain and some animosity for those guys on that Astros team. I know that it's the Yankees, and they've done this before with, you know, bringing in guys like Roger Clemens and Johnny Damon, you know, former foes to help you win games. But I just can't see that. And then the same kind of goes with me with Corey Seager. I know that he's very talented and he's a lefty, but he's not that much of a defensive upgrade. He gets hurt quite a bit. Sometimes it's a fluke, like the kind of stuff that's happened to Judge in the past. But as I'm talking through that, you know, maybe they can sign the other two names, whether it's Simeon or Story, to a shorter deal because they really like these prospects that are coming up. And this doesn't lock them into a player with potentially a $300 million contract for the next who knows how many years.
Max Goodman joining us here from Sports Illustrated covering the Yankees. You know, your point on Correa is a great one. You know, if it's not even just would Correa be accepted by the players in that clubhouse, but would the Yankee fan accept Carlos Correa, Max? Do you think they'd be able to get over the cheating scandal if Correa gets a big deal and, you know, is put in a spot where he would have to help this team try and win a championship?
Well, look, Correa is one of the best shortstops in the game. And I think that maybe after a little bit of an adjustment, if they do sign him, and he's not going to sign a one-year deal, right? They'd have to get used to it eventually. But once he's out there hitting home runs and playing a really quality shortstop, making plays on the base, I mean, he's an all-around, all-star, superstar shortstop. And as much as it's going to be an eyesore at the beginning, if this ends up happening, I think fans are going to get used to it pretty quickly because he's contributing. You know, if he gets off to a cold start, like you saw with Joey Gallo, for instance, I think that the fans might turn on him pretty quickly. But I really, with someone experience, postseason experience, he's played at the highest levels on a really good team and distinguished himself. So I think he would shine. It's just a matter of if Brian Cashman and the guys in the front office really want to bring him in and potentially suffer the consequences in different ways.
Do you think if they were to sign Carlos Correa before they would do it, they would talk to Aaron Judge to see what he thinks? Because he was obviously very critical of the Astros following the scandal, and obviously a lot of people on that 2017 Yankees team have a lot of bad blood towards members of the Houston Astros.
I think you have to. And the only reason that they wouldn't maybe is if they're planning on letting Aaron Judge walk or planning on trading him, which I don't think they would do. I mean, he said the other day, I think it was on like a fanatics thing online somewhere I saw, but he even said this at the end of the season that he wants to be a Yankee for life. But they do have to make some sort of decision soon about if they're going to lock him up. I know I'm digressing a little bit here, but if he's part of your picture moving forward, you have to factor him into these decisions because he's the closest thing they've had to a captain since Jeter and the closest that they might have to a captain in many, many years. But you're bringing in a guy like Correa, who was right up there with Altuve, the leader of that Astros team that's been to the ALCS, if not the World Series, pretty much every single year.
Max Goodman is our guest here on the Jake Asman Show on our Progressive Guest Line, talking about the Yankees and their offseason plans with Max, who covers the team for Sports Illustrated. Max, how do you think the fact that the Yankees' two best prospects, right, one of them being Anthony Volpe, who is a New Jersey kid, how do you think that factors in what the Yankees might do at shortstop? Could they sign one of these guys with the intention of eventually moving one of those guys over to third base?
Right. I think that would be the plan. And, a guy like Corey Seager maybe profiles as someone that could move to third in the next couple of years. Maybe you get some better defense out of him. If Gleyber Torres maybe isn't part of the plans and you're going to use him as trade bait in another separate move for a separate position, maybe you could move them over to second in the near future. But we also don't really know, as much as those two prospects you named are starting to inch closer and closer to the big leagues, we don't know how they're going to play at the next level too. So as much as you got to be patient in this league and prospects are so important in Major League Baseball, you can't just count on them being superstars at shortstop at the next level. So I think you have to, find that balance between, okay, this is the plan 2 to 4 years from now, when those guys are really distinguishing themselves on a big league roster versus, okay, we're not sure if they're going to be able to play defense at shortstop in the bigs and if they're going to be able to contribute on offense too. Although they are really highly touted within this system. And I was looking at their numbers today, coincidentally, and they were really putting up some quality numbers, both of those two.
Max, how realistic is a trade for Matt Olson of the Oakland A's?
The more I think about it, Jake, I really do think that it is pretty based on what we're hearing, what he's hearing about what's going on in Oakland and how they're potentially going to be dangling some of their top names like Olson or Chapman or the starting pitchers that they have as well. I think the Yankees profile as a team that has the prospect to make a deal with them. If Oakland goes around and says Matt Olson's available, a lot of teams are going to start to call them. But the Yankees have a surplus of stops in the system, and that's the kind of position that, the A's might want to build with if they can get one of those younger guys. I don't think they would trade a Jason Dominguez for Matt Olson, but there are a lot of different high caliber and high upside players in the Yankee system right now that they could potentially view them as expendable, even if they're highly touted. With what I was saying earlier, you're getting a player like Matt Olson who right away could be a 40, 50 home run type of guy playing at Yankee Stadium in a full season. And he's a huge upgrade at the position where if you don't bring back Anthony Rizzo, you're putting Voit and LeMahieu at first, who aren't going to play as good defense as Olson, aren't going to have that matchup as Olson, being that he's a left-handed hitter, and it would provide some more balance to the lineup. So I think that if they can get it done, that's something that they should do, but it's a question of how much they'd be willing to spend in prospects, because it's going to cost a lot.
Totally agree. And, you look at Anthony Rizzo. I liked him when he was with the Yankees. He obviously, was clutch, contact guy. He is, of course, a guy that is phenomenal defensively. But is he worth like a multi-year deal? Like, what would be a fair contract for Brian Cashman to give out if the Yankees do decide to bring back the lefty and Anthony Rizzo?
Well, maybe they can come to some sort of agreement about a discount, maybe, for him to come back to New York, just because both sides liked it so much. And, there were reports from earlier in the offseason that Rizzo's eager to come back, and he really loved his time in New York. I'm pretty sure he has family from the area. I think he talked about that over the course of the season too. But remember, he's never really been in this position before when it comes to free agency. So maybe he wants to go out and test the market and see if he can get paid. And I'm sure there are teams out there that would be willing to give him more than just a 2-year deal, which is something that I can see the Yankees doing. So when it comes down to the financials, I mean, there's so many different moving parts. And that's the exciting part about this offseason, I think, is that every single move would be related to each other. And even if they're going to blow past the luxury tax threshold, there's still a bit of a budget for them in terms of they can't just pay every single top free agent. Even if they're going to be the evil empire this offseason, there's still a little bit of a boundary, right? So if you're going to go with Rizzo, maybe you can't bring in a starting pitcher, or you can't go out and bring in Starling Marte in center field, right? So all of these things are connected. If he agrees to maybe take some sort of discount, I think you have to pounce at that opportunity too, because of the defense and the leadership and the hitting for contact right in the middle of that lineup.
What are you hearing about Gary Sanchez's future with the Yankees?
Man, it seems like they'd be willing to move on from him if something came up. I mean, that's what Cashman was talking about even in his, the post-mortem press conference right after the end of the season, that, he's viewing every single position and trying to make an upgrade and improvement to this roster, as he should, right? I mean, everybody except a certain amount of people, they're expendable if you're going to make an upgrade and make the team better. So Sanchez has had ample opportunities to reach the potential that I think we all thought that he was going to have when he was coming up with the Baby Bombers. And he struggled a lot, but, I try to have a positive outlook on things. He has gotten better on defense. Incrementally, it's not really that big of a glaring improvement, but I think that the one knee down stance and the framing and those types of things, he's getting a little bit better. His arm is a plus arm behind the plate, and his power at his position is pretty elite. When he's locked in, he's one of the best power hitting catchers in the game. So it might just come down to there aren't that many other options at catcher and target other positions. And maybe down the road, he's approaching free agency too, if I'm not mistaken. So you can kind of address that. Austin Wells and Donnie Sands and those guys coming up too. So there is a future at that position within the organization too.
Finally, Max, I want to just ask you about the idea that Masahiro Tanaka could be an option for the Yankees this offseason. Could you see a reunion with Tanaka come back to the Yankees? Maybe not, on a huge deal by any means, but I know he's open to finishing his career back in the United States. And obviously, every Yankee fan would love to have Tanaka back.
Sure. The quote from when I think he signed to go to Japan that I've seen a few times on social media is that he has unfinished business in the United States and in Major League Baseball. And, he is a fan favorite, and I haven't looked at his numbers in Japan and how he did. Obviously, it's a different league, but I'm sure he did well, and I'm sure he could contribute on this starting rotation. But again, I don't know if he is necessarily the right option when it comes to adding a starting pitcher. I mean, if you have a chance to bring in a Justin Verlander or a Max Scherzer, I think those are the right guys when it comes to mid to late 30-year-old starting pitcher that's had success in the past. But those two that I mentioned are going to be very costly. So everything's related, and maybe you get him at a discount if he wants to come back. But I think he signed a 2-year deal too. So maybe there's an opt-out that he could come back after 1 year, or maybe this would be for 2023. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think it's a valid question.
Max, appreciate the time as always, man. Enjoy the rest of the offseason, and when the Yankees make some moves, we'd love to hear from you again.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks for having me, man.
Max Goodman does an excellent job covering the New York Yankees for Sports Illustrated, joining us there on our progressive guest line. Tanaka, to me, would be a no-brainer for the Yankees if they could bring him back. 1-year deal. I'm pretty sure if he is on a 2-year deal in Japan, there's an opt-out where he can come back to the United States if he gets an offer. So I would do that if I'm the Yankees. And, if I'm signing one of these shortstops, to me, Seager makes sense. He's a lefty. I get it. But if you want the best one, to me, Correa is the best one. Now, if you don't want to go 10 years with Correa, I wouldn't sign Seager. I'd sign Marcus Semien, who's 31 and would probably only need like a 5-year deal. Jeff Passan said Springer money. Well, Springer money could make some sense for a guy like Marcus Semien. So I'd be open to that as well if I'm Brian Cashman. We'll take a quick break, wrap up our show. Jake Asman hanging out with you here on a Saturday. This is the Jake Asman Show on SportsMap Radio.